If you walk in and you're a humble guy, I don't care if you have been in 500 fights. If you're just like, hey, like I really want to learn what you guys do here is cool and everything. You know who's not going to get beat up that day? You. Because you walked in, you checked your ego, and then you came to learn, which is what I do. That's why I don't like walk in there acting like, hey, I used to be in the UFC, this and that. Like, you don't know who I am, blah, blah, blah. And like start bossing around, because if you walk in humble and ready to learn, there's a million people that are ready to teach you.
What a pleasure to be chatting to Chris Cammozi. Chris, I've been watching you fight for many years, PFL, UFC, and then you made the switch to bare knuckle. So you had a long career in combat sports, and I've been a fan of combat sports forever. So it's really cool to chat to you, and I've been following you for many years.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, I was excited to come on here because we have a lot of mutual connections, and then also just like what you do, what I do. So yeah, it should be fun.
So Chris, can we start? I'd love to. It's always so interesting finding out former fighters, what got them into combat sports in the first place. Like, were you the George St. Pierre athlete fighter, or were you more the, if I wasn't fighting professionally, I was fighting on Saturday night because you just have so much energy and anger from your youth? What was your path to combat sports?
Unfortunately, I would say the latter. So
nothing wrong with that. You've evolved.
Yeah. I've grown up as a person, but no, originally I would say, so I grew up wrestling, but I was always just a contact sport kid, right? Like I wanted to play football. I wanted to box when I was a kid. My parents didn't let me. I wanted to do every contact sport there was. I don't know why. I was just like that, like rough kid that was always getting hurt. My mom, like, bless my mom's heart, because I would come home just like ruined from whatever stupid thing I did, like building a ramp and I'm going to jump my bike off it. The ramp broke and I busted my face, and just always like mischievous, seeing how high of a tree I could climb and like drop out of and be okay. But yeah, so I got into wrestling, and then anybody that's grown up wrestling knows that I think wrestling is great for kids because it gives you like focus, drive, hard work, like dedication, all those things. And it just, even if you're a hyper kid or a troublesome kid, any of that, there's so much that you can like zone in on it. So wrestling was great for me. As soon as I got into wrestling, I stopped doing like most dumb things because it takes so much energy, so much time, so much focus, and then it's exhausting. So I think that's exactly what my mom was looking for when I got into it, because I would come home just too tired to do anything stupid. So that was my start. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Chris, don't you think that's one of the problems with kids today is they're stuck inside so many times, staring at screens for hours of the day, and then they have so much energy, it's got to go somewhere, and then it tends to go towards bad things. So I think kids, especially boys and girls too, to an extent, they've just, we didn't evolve to sit still for hours of the day staring at screens. We evolved to move and do things. And boys, the most natural thing I think is contact sports. But I was the same as you. I was falling out of trees. I was a skateboarder when I was a kid, getting all cut up and beat up when I came back, falling off my skateboard. So I just think now, especially I come from Chicago, living in the city, most parents are not letting their kids play on the street when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, like I grew up, and probably you too, where you just, your kids out there with the neighborhood kids living life.
Yeah, I think that is a big problem. Like nowadays, I don't know, you told me before we jumped on here that you live in the country and stuff, but in the city, like I can say I don't actually know very many of my neighbors anymore. Whereas a kid, I knew a ton of my neighbors. My parents knew the neighbors. So if I was just out and about, like everybody kind of like kept an eye on each other. Like there was actually more of a community. And now it's way more separated. Like, you could live in the suburbs and still not know all your neighbors. So I think that it does suck nowadays because we like to talk about how, like, when I was a kid, we did this, and this, but it's also not safe anymore. For you to let your kids out wherever you live and just like be like, oh, they're good because I know my whole neighborhood. Everybody is a tight community and watching out for each other. I feel like that's gone away too. So I do agree with you that kids nowadays also stay inside playing video games, but I also think that on the other side, there's so many weirdos out there and crime and all this. Like, do you want your kids out there roaming around? Where when we did it, I just had to be home before the lights came on. You know, as a little kid, I could go wherever, but I had to be home before the lights came on. But my parents also knew that like everybody in the area knew whose kid was who,
Yeah.
and where they belong, and like kind of watched out for each other.
Yeah, that's so true. And Chris, one of the reasons we moved from downtown Chicago to where we are now, an hour south, is because I had two neighbors on the street. One, him and his wife don't have any kids. The other one has two young kids. And one of the reasons was I wasn't even looking here. I wasn't even looking to move, but this house came up on the same street with these two guys. And one of them sent it to me. And he was like, Lawrence, this is the perfect place to raise your kids. And I'd seen when I come out here in the summer, his two kids are playing with 10 other kids from the street. And they do have a bit more of that neighborhood looking out for each other. So that was honestly a huge decision. But you're right. There's so many places where people live. It's not safe. I wouldn't want my kid out there by himself at 8 years old. And I don't know if there's more. I think there's definitely seems to be more disturbed people and dangers now than when we were kids. But it's also when you hear about it more, right, with the internet. I feel like before when we were kids, the odd things probably happened, but we didn't really know about it as much maybe. Seems like there's definitely more fear in the air though.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I think that fear is justified because, again, if I had kids right now, would I let them go ride their bikes outside where I live? And I live in a great area, but would I let them and just not watch them? No.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a give and take, I guess, because yeah, maybe it is just more exposure to it, but at the same time, I don't know. There's not like the same sense of community that there used to be, at least when we were growing up.
No, it's the same thing. And I think it's rare what I have on the street, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. But we definitely didn't. The idea of neighbors' parents looking after other kids and be like, no, he's okay. They're kind of keeping that watch on them. That was how I grew up. Like the neighbors were kind of looking out for me too. So yeah, I definitely, that's one thing that I want to do for the neighborhood that I'm in too, is I want to look out for other people's kids. If they want to hang out and play, I have 8 acres in the back. If they want to be out there playing, that's fine. I'll keep an eye out on them too, you know? So it's really cool. So from being like, I didn't grow up with wrestling, so I'm from England. And that was the one when I was my past life in MMA, I had 10 pro fights, Chris, just local Midwestern scene. And my biggest weakness when I started, I was a boxer and a jiu-jitsu guy. And the missing link was the wrestling. And that was something that I used to always make excuses to miss wrestling training because, my back's hurting today, but tomorrow for boxing sparring, I'll be there. And eventually I finally was like, I've got to work on this. And the last couple of fights, I made it easy because I used wrestling and jiu-jitsu instead of being a former boxer trying to trade with 4-ounce gloves. So I have so much respect for wrestling and envy that we don't really have that in England. And that's definitely one sport that I want my son to do, jiu-jitsu and wrestling when he's young. But there's a big difference between wrestling and then pure MMA combat. So was it just that you were kind of lost and you were looking for what to do with your career, or how did you go from being a wrestling athlete to a fighter?
Yeah, so you might know about this. So along with wrestling, I played rugby in high school, right? So once high school ended, I went to college. My college had a rugby team, so I played rugby there. But I only went to college for 1 semester. So that's why half the time I don't like to say I went to college, because I was only there for like a little bit of a time. But as soon as the season ended, I was like, well, I don't really like college. I just like playing rugby there. And, I also like being on my own, all of that. So the season ended and I was like, you know what, I'm going to move back home. I don't really like this place. And so I moved back home and was working a job that obviously I didn't enjoy. I had just turned 18. So when I graduated, I was 17. I was 17 through my first semester of college. After that first semester, I came home. I was 18, started working a job here in Denver in a warehouse, of course, stocking warehouses. And I was like, man, is this going to be the rest of my life? At the time, I was like, yeah, this is what you get. You don't go to college and you don't get a good job, because that's what the narrative used to be.
Yeah.
And I had some friends that I grew up wrestling with in high school and when we were younger were like, hey, we've been going to this gym. You should come check it out. I think you would like it. And it was an MMA gym. So it was jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. And for me, I always say I was very lucky, because I didn't vet the gym. I didn't look it up. I didn't do any research, nothing. Because back then, like, none of these sites existed anywhere where you could even see about like fights and yada, yada. So I went, I loved it. So I started going to work and then going to the gym every day. I went one time and then started going every day. I signed up that day. And luckily for me, the owner of the gym was a guy named Brad Gum. So it's Gumm. He was already a black belt in jiu-jitsu under the Machados. And then he had fought in the early UFCs, like 20s. I think UFC 27 was his first one. And he was only like 5 years older than me, but he had been doing this for a long time. So like Boss Rutan and I are friends, and Boss used to come do his invitational here in Colorado, and knew Brad and Dwayne and all those guys. So it by pure luck, I walked into an actual legit gym, because you know as well as I do, there's so many, what do you want to call them, McDojos or whatever, like fake people teaching. By pure luck, I walked into there, loved it, and then I went through probably 7 fights with Brad before he closed up the gym. So yeah, I got into it. I started training originally just to work out, you know. Again, I thought I was just working these jobs that I hated the whole time. These guys told me about it. So I just showed up every day, training, loving it, learning. And then finally he asked me like, hey, would you be interested in doing a local fight? And I didn't really know that the local fights were a thing. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I was one of his first fighters, actually, because come to find out, he had just opened the gym right before I came.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That's so cool. So were you one of the people that, obviously with your wrestling background, you were probably pretty much off the bat pretty good? Is that right? Doing well in the training room?
Yeah, I would say one of the top guys there, like as far as when I just started, just because of the wrestling factor, right? So he had jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. And then wrestling was kind of on you. If you came in with a wrestling background, great. So I could kind of control where the fight was, you know, just like now, like wrestling is a great tool. So there were a lot of guys that knew wrestling and Muay Thai. So if I took them down, I got submitted a ton of times once I took them down. And then I didn't get punched a lot either. I was able to take them down a lot. So I found that middle ground, and then I started learning both the other aspects and learning how, like, if I could take you down and put you in the position I want, then I could start flowing into what I know. So that gave me some peace of mind, because I didn't go in there with nothing. Like if I didn't know how to wrestle and then I didn't know jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai, I would just get beat up all the time.
Yeah.
So it definitely helps.
I think that's something I've been thinking about this, like with my son. I don't want to put him in too much crazy hard training when he's too young to handle it. Because for me, back when I grew up, there was no, and I'm turning 45. So when I was growing up in England, there was like traditional martial arts and there was MMA, but it wasn't really around where I was. And so I felt like I developed a bit of my character through traditional martial arts. And then by the time I went to MMA training, I was already in college. I was 18. I was a bit more mature. And I always think back, if I jumped into a tough MMA gym as a kid, like some of these kids today, 10 years old, and they just go into these, they're already starting like doing, you know, real high level jiu-jitsu training and high level boxing. I wonder if that would have just burned me out and I would have quit at 13. You know, so I'm always kind of grateful for me personally that it took me a little bit of time to kind of work into it. But one thing that I guess, what's the difference, Chris, between when you were fighting on the regional scene and then when you're in the UFC and you just have that massive spotlight on you? Was it very different for you, or like did you take the pressure in your stride, or suddenly going from being the local scene? I'm sure it's the same with you, like it was for me, where I'd be cutting weight for a fight and then they would cancel the fight on me the day before. And you know, it was just like kind of, I know you get cancellations at the highest level, but the regional scene tends to be, you know, it's a lot of crap you have to deal with that's nothing to do even with fighting, and then you're doing it for almost no money. For me, it was all about personal, like kind of dealing with my own demons, my own fear and things like that, self-growth. But you go from the regional scene to suddenly you're in the UFC, you have this huge spotlight on you. What was that transition like?
You know, I think you hit it spot on, actually. I think that the regional scene, the local scene trains you for, or at least it doesn't train you for it, but you go through the harder things, not the harder fights, but the harder things dealing with the regional scene, right? So cancellations and stuff, the fighting in barns and whatever venue that like the locals have around. I've fought in some of the worst places ever where you're just like, oh God, you show up, you don't even want to be there, but you're like, this is the job. And so you take that and you go through that. When you get to the UFC, you're like, wow, this is like so professional, so well run. Everything is great. So I feel like the reward is getting through the darker scene of local MMA, regional MMA, because that, you're right, it gets like real shady. Like your opponent could change at weight.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you get to the UFC, it's like so buttoned up. I feel like that prepared you. It's like you already got the worst. Now it's just like your job is just to show up and fight. That was one thing like Burt Watson always said. He's like, everything else is my job. So Burt Watson was he was the head of operations for the UFC. And he always had a speech every single fight, like, let me take care of everything. As soon as you land in town, he's like, your luggage is lost, you get arrested, if this happens, if that happens, he's like, if your wife's yelling at you, tell me, I'll deal with all of it. All you do is focus on fighting. Where the local scene is just like chaos. So that was actually calming and kind of like, it felt like real sports. Because like NFL guys or NBA guys, they don't deal with that. They show up they have assistants, they have a whole team. So the UFC kind of gave you like a team of like, if you need it, call them. Like if I forgot my cup, I don't have to go around town and like find a sports store and find a cup or this or that. They're like, just tell us, we'll go get it. We'll have somebody bring it right to your room. So the catering to that felt like real, what you think is professional sports, as opposed to the local scene. If you forgot your cup, you're going to have to ask a guy in the locker room, like, hey, can I use that? Like nobody gives a shit. So,
Chris, you just reminded me, talking about the rinky dinky places. You just reminded me, I did a lot of boxing, and then I was 30. So I was like, I just want to jump into pro MMA, but I had one amateur fight, and the show was called Babes and Brawls. And it was in this rinky dink shitty strip club with the most nasty strippers walking around. And I'm in the back trying to warm up, but my coach was kind of older, and he's like, dear God, I don't want to see these girls. And he's like, he pushed me in this, it was like this old shitty kitchen area because they serve crappy, wings and that kind of food. And I'm trying to warm up on the pads and like not hitting people, like moving around with trays of food. I'm just like, oh my God, it really is. Because you're so used to watching, you watch the big shows on TV and you see them with their own private locker rooms and the mat space, everything. And you just assume that's normal, but that's not normal. That's the UFC. So I totally understand what you mean about it. Does it? I'm sure going through that, if you just went straight to the big show, you want to kind of work your way up to that. That's so true.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell you endless stories about local shows of literally, like I said, barns, strip clubs, like you said, it's endless. So if you can get through that, I feel like if you make it to the big show off that and you don't come out of like NCAA wrestling champion straight to the UFC or whatnot, those are like character builders though too, because I think to me that was like a mental training. Yeah. Can you stay focused with all this other like crap going on where like conditions are not perfect? Because not everything's perfect, right? Like fighting is chaos. I call it like organized chaos. And whoever can organize the chaos better or control the chaos will win the fight. So yeah, local shows, everything. Those are, man, even now, like when I go to them, I'm like, man, I feel bad for these guys. So when I go to a local show and I see a guy like just put on a highlight reel, I'm like, that guy is probably going to make it, And I've watched a lot of those guys come. I met Justin Gaethje. First time I met Justin Gaethje was in somewhere in Nebraska. I don't even remember where. And he was still in college. He was in the same locker room as me. I was the main event. I got to talking to him. He had like big glasses, everything. He had no team with him. He was by himself.
Wow.
And we got to talking. He was from Colorado. So I was like, oh man, like you're from Colorado. That's cool. You're on this card with me. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, where's your coaches and team? And he's like, I don't have coaches or team. He's like, I'm on the wrestling team in Northern Colorado. I don't think he was even supposed to be fighting because he was on scholarship. And I remember telling my coaches, I'm like, man, this is going to be horrible for this kid. Because he kind of like back then he was like very small, no muscles, giant glasses. everything. And I remember telling him, I was like, hey, if you need some corners, I'm fighting way after you. We're all from Colorado. Like my coach is a corner and stuff. And he's like, no, I'm good. And I remember we were like watching in the locker room. We're like, this is going to be bad. And he just demolished the guy. And you're just thinking, this guy showed up in the middle of Nebraska, no coaches, no team, walked out carrying his own water bottle, all that, and then just destroys some guy. And we're like, who is that?
Who is
kid?
this guy?
And now look at him, like, it's crazy because it's just that mental fortitude of like going through those certain things. And this was a horrible arena, all that, like, and then I think that it's just like mental training too.
So is there something like, if you were talking to your younger self when you first were turning pro, say you're a couple of fights in, what do you think would be the best advice that you've learned, that you know now that you didn't know back then?
Man, I appreciate like the grind and like stuff I went through. So I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't be like, oh, let all the conditions be perfect. But I don't know. I think that most of the things that I would change would be based on my own performance, not like my past. I think one thing I did do that I somewhat regret is this might be a long-winded answer. Some of it is loyalty, right? So loyalty is a great thing, but at the same time, parts of my career, and I won't say who, I stuck with coaches that didn't really have the training partners for me or the resources for me, but I'm loyal to that person, right? Where I should have been a little bit more selfish and been like, I love you, but I need to go here and I can come back. And it's just because we were at different timing, like time in life. This coach was getting more established, who I really liked, building their gym. And I stuck around when I'm in the UFC and I don't have training partners or anybody else. Like there was a point where my biggest training partner was 155 pounds and I was fighting 185 in the UFC. And it was 155 and below are my training partners. And I'm fighting some of the best guys in the world. But I stayed loyal to the team and the gym. When hindsight, I should have been seeking out some other like bigger guys to train with, to prepare.
Brother, I like you even more, Chris, because that's exactly what happened to me. I was training at a boxing gym, and then I was doing jiu-jitsu, and I was so loyal to my boxing coach because he was like the first. I was a finance guy who walked into a gym just to get in shape, and I didn't even want to fight. I just wanted to train. He got me in the Golden Gloves. I won the Golden Gloves. I had 25 amateur boxing fights. I fought in tournaments in different states, fought for the state championship, like all this. Had all this great history with him. I had so much loyalty, but at the time he was older and he was completely burnt out with training, and he was only kind of coming for me, but I didn't really have the right sparring. And eventually I went to Team Curran, which was about an hour away, where you have like Jeff Curran was a UFC champ, a former veteran. Pat Curran was a Bellator champ. You had like a legitimate MMA gym with a cage and good sparring partners. And I always think, fuck, if I'd gone there like 3-4 years earlier, I would have done so much better. But loyalty, man, it's like I'm glad I have it because I want to be a loyal person. But it sounds like the same situation with you. If you'd been a bit more selfish, not in a bad way, but just putting yourself first, it would have made things a bit different.
Yeah. I mean, I know like Pat and Jeff, both great guys. Like I know them. Loyalty is a double-edged sword, right? Because you can be loyal, but also it's like diminishing returns sometimes. So
right.
It doesn't mean that you have to dislike the person or anything. It's just different times in life.
Yes.
And that's a tough thing to get past if you're a loyal person. But I would say anybody that's listening to this that does MMA and everything, it's a very selfish sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be selfish because even if you're in the UFC, like these guys that have wives, kids, all that stuff, they have to kind of put that on hold to make that money. And like, one, you're chasing your dream, and then you might have a wife and kids, and maybe you miss your kid's soccer game or whatever, but you're also trying to provide for them. So it's a tough, like, which way do you go? You have to be selfish about yourself if you're a professional athlete. And that doesn't always rub everybody the right way. You're going to be the bad guy in somebody's story because if you're selfish and it's based on you and you're just saying like, love you, but you're not here yet for me, like you're not at the level that I need. Now that person might hate you and be like, oh, he thinks he's big time, this and that. And you're like, that's not what it is. It's just like, you don't have the resources for me. So it's
Exactly.
a tough thing.
And also, Chris, if you're a winner in life, a lot of the time you think, I'm just going to put more effort into it. So just talk about relationships. If you're in a bad relationship, instead of being like, the best thing to do is we're not compatible, let's just end this. A lot of the time you'll see like alpha successful winners in life stay in these very dysfunctional relationships for way too long. And actually the relationship before I met my wife, I mean, I was in my late 30s and I was, free. I spent a year with somebody who was just the polar opposite of who I should have been with. And it was terrible. Looking back, it was so dysfunctional, but I had that mindset like, no, if I work on it, I'll figure it out. So I think that's one of the most important questions is it doesn't mean to be a dick and not be loyal, but also make sure you're fighting the right fight, right? Not trying to force a square peg in a round hole or like force a situation in a gym that isn't right for you. And you'd hope that the people like, it was weird the way the transition happened, but I know that looking at my coach, I know part of him was, I wish he had just been like, I'm kind of done with this. He was coaching for many years. He had some people that fought for the heavyweight title years ago. He had, some big names. And I think he was sticking in it for me, for the loyalty, when the better thing for both of us would just be like, this isn't the right thing. So I think that's the older I get, one of the hardest questions to answer is, when do you walk away versus when you keep fighting for something, whether it's a business deal, whether it's a relationship, whatever it is that you're trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit it spot on actually, because you and I have messaged before, but we've never spoken in person. It's for anybody listening to this, but you and I have a ton in common because my original coach I told you about, Brad Gum, I love that guy. And like, we haven't talked in 15 years probably. Because one day he closed up the gym, he was burned out and done. But one thing he told me a long time ago was when I started getting to those higher levels, I came off the Ultimate Fighter. I was signed to the UFC. I showed up to the gym one day and he was like, hey, what are we going to do? And I was like, I just showed up like every other day, ready for practice. And I was like, what do you mean? What are we going to do? And he was like, I don't have guys on your level to train with you. And he's like, I would like you to go start looking at some of these other gyms. He's like, I'll still coach you, but cross train with them. And he told me, he's like, in my career, I went through this and I don't want you to go through the same. He's like, I stuck by my coaches, but I should have been branching out. And so he gave me that freedom. And I was like, man, I really respect that a lot, actually. And he did. And I started doing that. I planned on him coaching me, forever, because he always had my best interests. He also actually never took any money from me.
Wow.
Oddly enough. So it wasn't like a monetary thing for him. He used to tell me on trips. So I started fighting in Canada when I was with him. He'd pay his own way. He paid for all his food and everything. And I was like, no, I mean, let me pay for it. He's like, I make enough money with the gym. I used to remember everybody had their hand out when I fought. He's like, just let me pay for it. I know you're trying to make it. And I'll love that dude forever for that. So then I did. He had kind of closed down the gym and left. And I bounced over to somebody else. And then it just started getting to more like money, like money means everything, and you see that a lot now. So I would say, not that you're asking for advice, but the people out there, if you're looking for a gym and everything, make sure that it's not money is the only thing. If your coach asks about money on day one, that's not the coach for you, most likely. That's not always the rule, but everything's not about money because fighting is a very personal sport, right? Win and lose together. You'll see my highest, my lowest. You might see me cry trying to make weight or whatever. There has to be like a bond there. You have to like really, your coach needs to have some love for you because fighters like will never stop fighting either. Sometimes throwing in the towel is actually a good thing. And your coach can save you from yourself. Cause like I would say 99.9% of fighters will die on their sword. They'll go out there, you can't see, whatever. Coach's job is to save you from yourself and also care about you. Not just say, take this fight because it makes a lot of money and I know my percentage makes a lot of money. It should be, we could take this other fight that pays less, but it projects your career and I have your best interests in mind. It's a hard thing to find nowadays. There's not I mean, I know some coaches, like you take Ray Longo. I love that guy to death. Like in New York, one of the best coaches I've ever met. He has no contracts with his fighters, nothing. Like he genuinely cares about every single one of those guys. And that's how my coach now, like Jake Ramos is. Like, it's not about money. It's not. Same with my jiu-jitsu coach. I look for people that don't care about money and they look for the ultimate goal to like get there.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I that's so important. And if like fighting is so dangerous and you're putting your health on the line every fight, and if you're not with the right team, not only you're not going to go as far, but it's just the risk and reward doesn't seem worth it. So if someone's looking to make this a career, that the best thing they should do, I mean, you're already sacrificing everything in the ring or in the cage, is pick up and go to a place where you have a team around you and they become family. So I don't know those guys, the coaches in New York personally, but I've heard nothing but great things about Ray, about Matt Serra. I've always loved those guys. They just have that people like Al. They have that like blue collar work mentality that I just love. I always felt like that too. I was always like a blue collar guy. Like for me, fighting was always about just hard work and grind and embracing it and trying to fulfill your potential.
Yeah, actually, I left Matt Serra out too. I love that guy. Like he's the exact same kind of person. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like it's hard to explain to people that like haven't fought, but like I said, fighting is a very intimate thing, right? Like that's your crew. You look at Navy SEALs or military guys, they call it a brotherhood. Fighting is a brotherhood. It's like we all win and lose together. And if one person is just there like for the money, then it doesn't work. And like you can read that energy. I mean, I won't say what gym, but there is a like mega gym worldwide, well known in the US. And I've been in locker rooms before. They weren't my coaches, but I've heard them talking about, they didn't know the guy's name, the first name of the guy that was fighting in the UFC.
Wow.
I remember like sitting there because I wasn't warming up yet. And as the guy was warming up, I heard him asking like, hey, what's his name again? Like, they don't even know. They're just there. It's just burn and turn. It's a fucking money wheel to them. And that doesn't sit right with me. Cause like, is it going to war? No, it's not going to war, but it kind of like in our world, it's going to war. Mm-hmm. And so everybody there, like, I feel like I hang out with my coaches, we go to dinner, like Whitney and I go to dinner with my coach and his wife or whoever. We like hang out on a personal level because like when we go fight, it's a big thing. I mean, there are people that die in this sport, but also just like knowing that your best interest is at hand. Like if your coach doesn't associate with you outside of money or the gym or anything, like that's not for me. And that's why I've like later in my career steered away from like those big gyms. Yep. Every young athlete wants to go to the big gym, but you don't realize that you're just a body to them for the most part. I'm not speaking for all of them. I'm just saying in like my experience of traveling around the world and training. If you are not on the highest pay scale in a lot of those gyms, it might be very attractive for you to go to wherever. But just know when you go, like they don't give a shit about you, most likely, because like you're not paying their bills.
Chris, that's such good advice. So I remember I had a couple of fights. I didn't really have a manager. I was having trouble getting fights. And I just started out. And one of my friends in Chicago, he was from Utah originally. And he said, Lawrence, like there's a big gym there, the pit elevated. There's a bunch of UFC fighters there. They have a show there every month. You could go for 3 months. You could bang out 3 pro fights. I've got a friend. You can like rent a place. He's got a place you can rent from him. So I remember I was just broke up my ex-girlfriend at the time. I'm single. I'm like, fuck it. Like nothing's going on in Chicago. I'm going to go. So I traded in my car for an SUV, threw my dog in. We drove to Utah. I spent a few months training out there. And it was exactly like you said. It was the guys were nice. They were a little odd in general in that state because it's a very Mormon state. I wasn't really used to it. But the guys in the gym were nice, Chris. But they didn't care about me. I was just a sparring partner for the guys there, the fighters. And that's just such good advice. And then talking about loyalty, you just reminded me of a story. When I was an amateur boxer, and in between, the Golden Gloves is only once a year. So in between, you'd have these show fights just to get more fights in. And I remember I was fighting in some gentleman's club, and I was fighting this guy. The whole fight, he would hit, hold, hit, hold. It was so frustrating. And then we ended up, so it's like a kind of an ugly fight. The whole time I'm just like, he's just holding, he's not really fighting. And then at the end, the guy takes a swing at me, like after the decision's been read and everything. I'm just standing there, and the guy runs over and he tries to hit me after the match out. And it was so unexpected because I was like, the whole time I'm frustrated, he's not fighting me. And it was the last thing I'd expect to happen. And I remember in a fraction of a second, my coach, and he was older, he jumped in and he like grabbed the guy. And I'm like, man, that's a guy that's got my back. You know, it's such a nice feeling to know. So that's the thing is, he always had my back. It was just, he just wasn't at a time of his life where he wasn't trying to take a guy pro, and you know, it was like he was just so burnt out. So I definitely, I think I've always had great coaches in the sense that they cared about me. It was never about trying to use you for anything, but it's trying to find that right fit, and it made all the difference. I just remember I was in like 32, 33, and it was just, I went into that Currents MMA, and it was just, they had a great program, great coaches. Everyone was on the same page. They had a show every few months, and I was like, man, if only I'd come here 5 years earlier. And I think that's really, really good advice. Is before you develop a history and deep roots somewhere, make sure you're in the right place to develop those roots. So I think that's really, really good advice for any young fighters listening.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, right now I could list out a bunch of gyms that I like, but that might not work for you or anybody else. Like, it's a personal fit. Like I'm saying, and I think you get it, I'm just reiterating for everybody else listening that what works for me doesn't work for you or whatever. Like, find where you fit in. Because just to clarify, so the pit, you said the pit elevated. I don't know about the pit elevated. The pit, so I used to go train with John Hackelman and stuff, who started the pit where Chuck Liddell came from. John Hackelman is one of those coaches actually as well. I'll tell you a funny story. Actually, I can't tell you what fight because I'm not sure, but there's a fight, if you look at Chuck Liddell's career, where like the towel was thrown in early on in his career because he, essentially what happened was Chuck got a bloody nose and his corner threw in the towel. John Hackelman, I love that guy to death, right? And I mean, I'll tell him this to his face, and him and I talk about it. He even self-admits, he's like, I'm the worst corner guy to have because he only corners guys that he loves. He's like, I'll throw in the towel right away. He's like, I sit there holding the towel every single time. And it was one of Chuck's early fights. He's like, Chuck got a bloody nose. He's like, I just threw in the towel. Like, fuck it. You don't need this shit. Like, it's a local fight. Nobody gives a shit. You're bleeding. I don't want to see it. And he actually hates cornering guys. He told me that. He's like, because if I corner you, it means I love you. And if I love you, like, I don't want to see you get hurt. And I remember thinking, like, man, that's like, would I let him corner me? Probably not. Because, like, if he threw in the towel, I'd be really mad. But he said, like, Chuck lost his mind because an early fight, he threw in the towel and he's like, he had a bloody nose. He's like, I don't want to see him bleed everywhere.
That's so funny. Chris, I think I remember listening to him talking years ago in an interview, but I think it was after Chuck had retired. And I remember him now, he was talking about the same kind of thing about how he's not the best cornerman because he cares too much. And he was talking about the anxiety he has. And I don't know about you, but I always felt like I have more anxiety when friends and teammates were fighting than if I was fighting. Because if you're fighting, you can control it. But I would always be so, part of your heart's out there when it's a really close friend or a teammate that's fighting, and you're just on the outside, you can't help it, but your heart wants to.
Oh God, absolutely. You hit it on the head. It is worse for me to corner people than it is for me to fight. Because again, like you just said, I control the outcome if I'm fighting. So my little brother was in the UFC as well. And so cornering him, like, I used to get sick to my stomach every single time before. And then my sister-in-law fights too. She's a professional MMA fighter. Yeah. And then Whitney was boxing last year and she's not done yet. Like, nauseating. Like, I hate it. If it's me, I'm calm, cool. Like, I'm one of the calmest people in the locker room. I've been told this by many coaches because, like, I couldn't even tell you why, but fighting doesn't scare me. Wrestling tournaments, jiu-jitsu tournaments, like, I am super nervous, but fighting, I don't know. It's like I don't know if this has to be edited or not, but the F-it switch, like, right. I just flip it and I'm like, what happens, But as far as wrestling and like jiu-jitsu, the ones where my face is not going to get bashed in, I get so nervous. I get more nervous to not compete at my best. I'm not worried about getting beat up. I'm worried about performing at my best. That's my biggest battle in my own head. Just to show up, do what I can do, show everybody what I can do. It's not getting beat up. Like that stuff doesn't last very long. A couple of days, you're good. So yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up.
Chris, that's so true. I always felt so frustrated when I was in the 10 MMA fights I had. I felt like every single one, even win or lose, I was fighting to a fraction of my potential. And then it was the last two I felt like, okay, I'm fighting to, you're never going to fight to your full potential, but you're fighting to 80, 90%. And then I was like, okay, I feel happy. I can be done. But I remember like 5, 6 fights in, I'm just like, what is wrong with me? Like I have days in the gym where it all comes together and then I'm out there and I'm performing badly compared to what I'm capable of. And I think nothing is more frustrating than knowing what you're capable of and for whatever reason, not being able to perform with the pressure. I don't think it was the pressure. I think I would have so much energy that I would just try and rush everything. Because when I was a boxer, I developed a style very early on to try and be a pressure fighter and wear people out. And at the lower levels, you can do that because it's only 3 2-minute rounds. But if you're having a crazy pace, you can break someone in the second round, beginning of the third round. They can't keep that kind of pace. But then when you're fighting professionally, a guy who's a pretty good local athlete, he can go 3-5 minutes. You can't break everybody. So I think I was always rushing it. But I know exactly what you mean. That feeling of it was never the pain. And I didn't even care too much about what I know some people, they have a lot of fear about everyone they love seeing them lose. For me, that never really bothered me because I felt like if people love me, they love me for me. They don't care about the results of a sporting competition. But it was just the frustration of years of training, knowing what you're capable of, and for whatever reason, not being able to put it all together.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I'm a little different because I would care about everybody watching that. And that was always in my head. But you take, I don't know if you've seen the movie, Any Given Sunday, right? So that's like a saying in football and everything, any given Sunday. The difference between other sports and call it combat sports, boxing, MMA, whatever. You don't get to do it every week, right? If LeBron James has a bad game, he plays 2 days later. He gets to redeem himself. There's a difference between doing like a 4-month training camp, fighting, not doing your best, and just, maybe you just shit the bed. And then you could wait. It's not even given that it's in another 4 months. It could be a year. It could be like the fighting schedule is not planned out ahead of time like other sports, soccer, everything. Here's their schedule. They'll give you the entire season. So if you're the athlete and you totally fail or have like the worst performance, you go home and you sit with that. You sit with it forever. You don't get to correct it, 2 days later, a week later, nothing. Like you don't even know when the next one is. So that's even worse, I think, is like your own thoughts and stuff. But yeah, and then everybody's different, some people are worried about being embarrassed. Some people are worried about getting beat up or whatever. Just the fact is that your next event is not planned already. You might get cut. Like your last UFC, if you're in the UFC, your last UFC fight could be somebody wiping the floor with you, just beating you every which way, and then they cut you. So the last thing people see on TV is that, and then you disappeared. Maybe you keep fighting on the regional scene or whatever, but like nobody sees that. You don't get the like sense of redemption.
That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, that sitting with losses is so true. I remember hearing something. One of the guys on the Ultimate Fighting show, he lost, and he was in pretty good spirits after. And he said to the camera, he said, if the worst thing in my life right now is losing a fight, then I'm a lucky guy. And I'll never forget that because I used to think about that all the time when I'd have disappointment. I'm like, man, these are first world problems. There's people that are struggling to find water or shelter. I'm like, I live in a nice place. I've got at the time I had a nice girlfriend in my life. Things were good in my life. I could put food on the table. I have shelter over my head. So that always really helped me. But I know exactly what you mean about the idea of waiting so long to redeem yourself is going to be really tough. Chris, I've heard you talk recently on a different podcast, but you were saying that for you, bare knuckle isn't very different. And I remember going from 12-ounce boxing gloves to 4-ounce MMA gloves. And that was a massive change for me because I felt like in boxing, if you got a good defense with big gloves, you can kind of protect yourself pretty well. With 4-ounce gloves, it's brutal. And you seem like a very cerebral guy. For me, having a lifetime in combat sports and training, bare knuckle for me is crazy. So how was that? What was the transition there? And was it just a good financial opportunity, or were you just wondering, hey, I wonder how? Because I feel like a lot of ex-UFC fighters and big names, they almost want to do a couple of bare knuckle fights almost as a bucket list kind of thing, just to kind of see how it is. But how was that transition for you?
There's a few things you said there, right? So if you take boxing glove to MMA glove, that is a big change. Because like when I box, yeah, you're right. You're like, if you block like this with a boxing glove, that will block everything. But with an MMA glove, it fits in. But bare knuckle to MMA, I feel like is not a big difference because bare knuckle, I don't know, like, well, MMA, you have a 4-ounce glove. So there's like a tiny little bit. Bare knuckle, so blocking is kind of the same, right? It's not that huge gap. If you went from boxing to bare knuckle, yeah, everything you think your glove is going to catch, it's going to block the whole side of your face. That fits in. MMA to bare knuckle, I would say, is comparable. You know, we're talking about like a quarter of an inch of pad. But for me, I don't think it's just monetary for guys. I think that I don't know. Bare knuckle pays very well, right? BKFC. Yes. I don't want to say bare knuckle. BKFC pays very well. The other bare knuckle organizations don't pay anything. Off this, I could share with you what those salary differences look like. They are substantial. I mean, missing zeros.
But what seems really cool, Chris, it seems like for BKFC, they're rewarding people like you who have spent years building a brand and a name and a following, and they're paying you really well. And that's the way it should be. Because if you were just starting out and you were a young fighter and you go to BKFC, you're not the name you are now. So I feel like they do a really good job of financially rewarding athletes that have spent years building up a name in combat sports.
Yeah. And I think that what a lot of promotions are actually missing, if you look at it, is I try to look at promotions of like who builds fighters, right? Now I don't want to like go on a bashing thing, but I would say PFL's problem, right? PFL does not market any of their fighters. They market the fights, but are they building stars? Bellator. I like Bellator. I watch the fights. Worst marketing ever. I follow MMA hardcore. I don't know when Bellator's on unless one of my teammates fighting. There's no marketing. They don't build any stars. The one thing the UFC, and I know I'm talking great about the UFC on this, just so you know, like I'm never going back to the UFC. I don't have any hopes of going back to the UFC. I had 20 fights with them. They don't pay me nothing. But one thing that they are great at is building stars. If they decided to make you a star, you get all these resources. They will make you a star. Like they have the marketing power to build stars. And the reason they have the marketing power to build stars is because they've been doing that. These other promotions are not like, I don't know. When I was with PFL, I was like, you know, not me, but like, look at Ray Cooper. He won the tournament a few times, Emiliano Sordi. There's a few guys that they have that were like diamonds in the rough that they had signed, and they did no marketing around them. They just were like, the next PFL is coming next week, blah, 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 just the event. The UFC has done an amazing job of like taking individual fighters, highlighting their story, making them relatable to you, everybody else watching, and make you a fan. So they have it's the marketing machine, right? And I think Bare Knuckle's trying to do it a little bit, but they should do better. You know, I mean, I do get paid by Bare Knuckle. I'll say that out. They should do better. You have to market the people because otherwise you become a promotion that just signs ex-UFC fighters.
Yes.
Which is what PFL is doing, Bellator, everything. The biggest stars they have are ex-UFC fighters. And that's because the UFC is the only one that can make you a star. They could do it, but are they putting the time, effort, resources into I use Ray Cooper as an example. He's not a friend of mine. I barely know him. I've seen him at events, everything, but like that kid's a stud. The PFL should have taken Ray Cooper and put a ton of money behind marketing him. I mean, like, we have this guy, because it just takes money, and to relate him to everybody watching, money, resources, all that. You can build your own stars. I think that most promotions are being lazy and not building stars.
But you bring up such a good
And I think
point.
that's what most of them are missing.
Right. But you bring up such a good point where so many people talk about how at the lower level, the UFC doesn't pay enough. But really, if I was a young fighter and I got the opportunity to be in the UFC, I wouldn't even be thinking initially about anything, how much I'm making for the next couple of fights. I'm thinking about how can I grow my brand, and then that's going to feed me for a lifetime. Have that mindset where once you become something, then your value is going to be higher, and you can go to any promotion, you can do things, opportunities outside the fight game. So I think that's such a good point. And you had a lot of fights in the biggest organization in the world. I'm sure that's opened up so many doors since then. 20 UFC fights?
Yeah, no, I mean, it has. And going back on what I just said, like, it takes two to tango, right? Like, the fighter also has to do their job. But I mean, I've seen guys in other organizations, like Bellator has, what is his name, Johnny Evelyn or whatever?
Yes.
Who is champion, and other fighters from the UFC to wherever, other organizations have been like, this guy is a killer. Like, and nobody, like, I second guess if I even said his name right. But I've seen him fight, and the guy is amazing. Bellator should have been putting some money behind that guy. Like, build your own stars. Otherwise, you just become the UFC offset. Guys that leave come to our promotion. I think that there really needs to be a push to build your own stars. Because if you start building your own stars, then you have a non-diminishing asset, right? Like, if guys see that you're building them up, like, well, take the UFC, because I can't think of the other ones. Take the UFC. Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva came from Japan, but nobody knew who he was until the UFC. Randy Couture, all these guys, Chuck Liddell, even current guys. The UFC has built them up, but no other promotions are doing that. So those guys will have a career if they want to. Say the UFC is like, you're out. They'll go to Bellator. They'll go to PFL, make a ton of money. But to everybody else, to the public, they're ex-UFC fighter. The reason ex-UFC fighter has so much value is because that's where the value is. Like, nobody else has that. If you say ex-Bellator fighter, everybody's like, what's Bellator? Or what's that? Because they're not marketing their guy.
That's so true. Chris, you're in such an interesting situation now where I'm sure you feel like on many levels, like you said, all the lower organization fights, and you're working on your mental game and getting the right team around you. And now it sounds like you're in a really good relationship. Everything's going so well for you. But obviously you are starting to think about life after fighting. And shout out to our mutual friend, John, for introducing us. But John said, he's like, you got to ask Chris, like, is he thinking about those guys? Like, I love Tony Ferguson. I remember seeing him on that crazy 12-fight win streak. It's such a shame he blew out his knee before he can fight Khabib for the title. And then he has this terrible losing streak. And, most of them were against really good guys. And the last one was kind of painful because he's just, in his prime, he would have probably smoked Paddy. But he ends up losing, pretty one-sided decision. And on the outside, it's so hard to see that, right? To see a guy who was so good for so long and then he stays around too long. Are you thinking about, obviously you are thinking about life after fighting. You recently got your real estate license, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, how much longer you want to do this? Because I can only imagine how hard it is for someone like you to walk away. Because for me, I was just like a local fighter enjoying it. And it came to a stage where I was like, man, I've got to get my finances in order and stop putting my life on hold for this. Like, I was never going to go anywhere, Whereas for you, you're already in, a real big show right now. You're probably getting compensated really well. And you've got, world-class skills. How hard is it for you to try and figure out how much longer do you want to do this for?
I've always said, so to answer the first part of that question, I've always said I'll do it as long as I love it. Like, if I don't love doing it anymore, I'm out, because you have to love it. It's not easy. It's not fun all the time. You have to love it. And if you're just showing up for a paycheck, like, you're in the wrong sport. I mean, you can make way more money doing a million other things than you can fighting. That's why even seeing the guys on like the regional scene or local scene, they're doing it because they love it. Like that $2,000, like, does that even pay half the people's rent anymore? I don't think, depending on where you live, $2,000 doesn't even pay your rent for the month. So the fact that you're doing it, you love it. But yeah, I've always been planning it. So I grew up very, very broke, you know, like single mom, 3 kids. My mom worked 2 jobs. My mom didn't go to college because my dad didn't want her to at the time. Then my dad bailed on us. So left us in a hole. And coming from like humble beginnings and stuff, it was just like work for everything you want, yada, yada, you know? So I've always been planning. Like I have that, what they call it, broke mentality.
Yeah.
Even the years I've made the most money I've ever made, you know, which was great money, which was better than a lot of people in the world. Every month I still was like, if income's not coming in, I'm going broke. Watching your account just go down, waiting for the next fight. So I've always owned my own businesses or done my like side hustles, other things, because I like seeing picture like my life as a P&L sheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see loss every month. I want to see at least even, you know, if I make a substantial amount of money, I want to at least see it stay even, not just go down every month until the next fight, then up. Yeah, I think I have that like broke mentality of like never again. So I've always been planning ahead and thinking like, how does this project me into this? Or for example, yeah, the real estate thing. So I always looked at real estate, and I feel like a ton of people do. But one thing I didn't want to do was, I'm not a builder. I'm not any of that. I didn't want to go look at bathrooms and crown molding with couples and see, you know, 20 houses in a day. So I got into commercial real estate where I deal with business owners, entrepreneurs, like all this stuff where we're talking about like big buys and people that have like big aspirations or are successful. And so that was always attractive to me because I also now doing commercial real estate, I get to meet people that might have had a crazy idea and are now millionaires. Like nobody thought that they would do it. I love hearing people's stories. Each client, I'm like, so how did you start? You know, and it's a cool thing to see that as opposed to buying a house. But yeah, just planning ahead because financial security is probably my number one goal ever. Just seeing my mom struggle her whole life and my family and everything. To me, I want to make a change. Like, what do they call it? Not generational change.
Generational.
I'm forgetting the name,
but Chris, so when you had good years or, you know, a couple of really big paychecks, were you trying to put money to work? Like, were you investing in anything? What were you doing along the way, or were you just saving?
No, unfortunately, back then I wasn't. Now I do. Gotcha. Back then, because again, it's not a knock on her, but like my mother never knew about investing or anything. It was paycheck to paycheck, you know, it was get by, survive, everything. So everything that I've learned has been through like trial and error, talking to people like yourself or other people that do have experience and just being like a sponge, take it in. And like, I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't know any of that. It's just trying to make those changes. And even now, like, I don't have it figured out, you know, I'm 37 years old and I'm still doing things that I wish I started when I was 20 and just learning about financial things because like financial literacy is not taught at all. You know, I had to take geometry and all these stupid classes in high school, but nobody ever taught you about taxes or write-offs or any sort of that, which taxes last forever. So they should teach that, you know, just certain things like that.
Well, Chris, that's so true what you said about being around interesting people, because I have my regular, I'm not sure in Colorado if you have a separate license for commercial or if it's just your real estate license and you focus on commercial. But in Chicago, it's just one license, so you can do both. But I got in with investors and developers, so I kind of work with most of my stuff is dealing with investors and interesting people. And occasionally I do exactly what you said, where I help friends buy condos and houses. And I'm always just so bored. I walk in, turn the lights on. I'm like, just kind of wait for them to walk around. But that's not very exciting. Whereas when I love the financial engineering aspect where someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I've got a guy it's actually really sad. He's got a terminal illness and he's got a chunk of money and he's got a wife and kids. And he's like, how do I best what do I do with this capital in order to have the best chance of making the most money for them when I'm not around anymore? So like we found a few different buildings in a very appreciating area in Chicago where they have good cash flow. But like stuff like that, I love the idea of just problem solving and trying to help people out like with financial engineering. And just like what you said, you meet really interesting people. Because a lot of people that are investing in real estate successful in other areas of life, and you get to hear their views, and then they open your mind to different things. So I think that's going to be a really good and like beneficial path for you for the future.
Yeah, that story that you just said terrifies me, and it's great on him for like looking ahead, like what would help his family and take care of them. And I look at that stuff, and there's so much that I learned even just doing the real estate schooling that I wish I would have known forever ago, that even if I didn't want to get into real estate, it's good things to know just as a human being in this world now. You should know about, because when I bought my first house, I didn't know any of that. And I just signed where, you trust the real estate agent, like sign here, here's what it means. And you're like, okay. Because when you look at some of those legal documents, I was fighting already and like was used to looking at contracts and stuff, but those legal documents are intimidating, scary. You don't want to feel dumb. There's just so many things that I think that I wish that I knew beforehand, but I guess learning them by fire also makes you appreciate them more.
That's true.
So that, yeah. And that's my new goal now, is working in commercial real estate. Like I want to help my friends, help all these people that I can with those things, right? So investments and stuff. But then I also want to like take that money that I make and roll it into investments for myself, because at the end of the day, all of us are not going to be able to do everything forever. So It's kind of like setting those pillars for life now. And sometimes, and this is the competitive mindset I have. I'm 37 and I'm like, I'm way behind. I wish I was doing this back when I was in the UFC, when I was making like really big checks that I could have just afforded. But, everybody's at their own time, their own place in the world. And yeah, I'm excited for the future now, and I would encourage everybody out there. I'm not saying, oh, now I'm doing real estate, you need to get into real estate, but like just educate yourself. And there are avenues out there, no matter what you do. If you don't think that you make enough money, like you do, it's just certain things, Start a 401k if you work for yourself. I'm not a financial planner, but I'm still learning. There's so many things that I wish I was taught earlier on.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And it's so funny because perspective is everything, right? So for me, I'm about to turn 45 in a couple of months, and I hear you, and 37 seems so young. But it's all relative. I always think about no matter where you are in life, yourself in 10, 20 years would give anything to go back to where you are today. And that always gives me solace. And you're a healthy guy. Hopefully we're going to live a long, long, long life. So it's never too late. And it's a really fucked up world we live in the sense that I love America. I was here, it took me 20 years to get my American citizenship. I've been here 22 now. And I love the opportunity. I love the entrepreneurial spirit of America. I love the history. I love just a lot of the culture about there's so much opportunity here. England is like a little America. It has a lot of the same things, but it's smaller and there's less opportunity. So I don't ever take it for granted what we have here. But at the same time, we live in an era where, just a couple of generations ago, one salary could support a family of, 3, 4, buy a house. You're not crushed by debt. Now, things like real estate has outpaced wage growth by so much. You have a lot of people where it's a couple and they're both working multiple jobs and you're behind in credit card debt, and real estate is likely going to keep going up. And it's just spreading the awareness of stuff like this, like getting yourself an asset, just getting your foot on the property ladder. I think everyone should try and do. The only advantage, I guess, is of renting is, if you're a young fighter or something, maybe you live in Texas and you're going to move to Colorado to train, and then you want to go to New York to train. That way you have a lot of flexibility when you're renting. But even so, just if you buy a place and you move, just rent it out and keep it. It doesn't matter. Even if it's a bad buy at the time, if you give real estate long enough time, it's always going to end up being a good buy. And that's something I've seen time and time again. Rent growth, just rents keep going up. So it's such good knowledge to have, is if you a little bit of sacrifice when you're young is going to pay dividends for the rest of your life if you buy a building, for instance. So it's just spreading that message, I think, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say one thing I thought when I was younger was to buy a house. Say your house is, this is absurd now, but say your house is 300 grand. I always thought you had to have 300 grand. Like, it's more, you start looking into the loans and all that, and like what your payment is, how can you cover that? But maybe you buy a house, you don't even live in it. Mm-hmm. You find out your payment, you find how much you can rent it for. Does that cover your payment? So you let somebody else pay off your stuff, even if you break even. These are things that I never even thought of until, the last 5-6 years. And it's interesting because I wish they taught that more. Mm-hmm. The way I was taught was like, don't buy anything you don't have money for, which didn't even make sense to me when I was younger because I didn't know what credit was. And I was like, well, how would I even buy it anyway? So there was, I was well into my late 20s before I ever had a credit card. I didn't have any credit. And credit to me is a stupid thing, but that's what at least America, I don't know about other countries, runs on. But yeah, it just things like that, like educating yourself. And now with there's so many resources online. It's just like doing the due diligence. Like, if you want to learn it, you can learn it. Don't say that you don't have the information, because you can Google anything. And if you actually put your mind and time to it, you can learn it. Do we all want to? No, I'm guilty of it too. Like, I don't want to study this just for no reason or whatever. But if you want to learn it, you can learn it. And it's hard, but you could do it.
I'm so glad you said that, because I didn't know about that stuff when I moved here either. And I was working finance, had an MBA, a degree in business, but I didn't know about the little tricks. Like, for instance, an FHA loan is 3.5% down, but you can get the seller to give you credit. So with the right kind of luck, you can almost buy a building with several units for almost nothing down. And there's all these little tricks. Like, you can't get a gift from a family member, because if he's put some money in your account, the bank's going to say, well, you have to have a paper trail. They don't accept gifts. But if you do it 2 months before, and then you can show 2 bank statements with it sitting there, they're just going to assume it's your savings. They're never going to ask. So there's so many little tricks like that where you can get on the property ladder with almost nothing. And every state has its own rules. But just learning that, and then it's going to be so great for you, because you're going to be around a lot of young fighters, a lot of people starting out, and you can just help them with that. So I think that's one thing where so many of my clients are from jiu-jitsu, and whether it's buying their first place, whether it's buying investment property, it's been something that I would never have thought of how many people I'd end up working with from jiu-jitsu, but it's been a huge aspect of my business, which has been really cool.
Yeah. And I think that along with that goes, just be humble. Like, you don't have to fake it till you make it kind of thing in this, right? You know what my pitch is right now for real estate, because I'm brand new and I actually don't feel like I know anything. But I have a managing broker who partners with me on every deal, right? So he's been in the game for a really long time. My pitch to everybody is, if I walk in your building and I'm like, listen, Lawrence, I would love to have this listing. If you want to sell this building, I would love to take it. You're like, why? Why should you do it? And I say, look, I'll be honest with you. I actually am brand new to this. Don't know much about it, but I don't have 100 other clients. Like, I can focus solely on yours, selling this. And then I have a managing broker who's going to sign off on everything I do. He's going to help me along the way. You're my number one attention. This is all I have to do. And if you're just upfront and honest with people, I've realized I've already got quite a few listings just by telling people, like, hey, I'm brand new, but I promise you, like, I can focus on this. So, I keep it at like 5, but that 5, there's 5 days in the week. I can spend an entire day on yours, somebody else's, whatever, while I'm learning this. And I've realized even building owners and business owners, I've gone in and just told them that, and they've given me their listing. But then I go ask them questions like, tell me about your business. What do you think about this? I ask them about investing, what they do. And actually, a lot of them are really like excited to tell you about it. And they've never had anybody ask. They don't really like the guy that walks in and just like, yeah, like I could have walked in and act like I've been doing this for 20 years and don't know anything. I think if you're upfront and honest and you set the expectations right, people will work with you. And I think that that goes a long ways in life. I've done that with a lot of jobs. Like, look, man, I'm brand new. I know you're yelling at me, but I just started. I'd like to help you out. But, you know, I've done that even working in like fast food jobs when I was like 15. Like, I get you're upset. I just started like a week ago, but I'll help you solve it, you know? And that like calms people down. You're relatable to people.
100%. Well, I'm going to give
in,
you just reminded me, because sorry to disrupt, but you just reminded me when I was first moved here, it was a trading company from London, and they were opening up an office in Chicago, and they sent me here. And there was a guy there. Shout out to my buddy Matt if he's listening to this. But he was like a huge jokester, and he was just always making people laugh. And he never really was a great trader. Made a whole bunch of money for the company, but they ended up having massive layoffs, and they fired half the company. And they fired one guy who was really competent, and I think he was much better at trading, but they kept this guy Matt because he was a great guy, and he always had the people cracking up, and he was such good energy. And I remember realizing, damn, that's something that they don't teach you at business school. Be personable and be nice, because people want to be around people they like. And kind of the same, talking about trying to find the gym with that environment and the people you want to be around. It's the same with real estate. Like, I have clients that they'll tell me, like, you know, I want to give you my business developers because I want to talk to you. And it's not about, I want to be able to have dinner. They want to be able to have dinner with my wife and I, and we have a nice dinner and we have things to talk about. They want to be around that personable person that they like, that good energy. So you have that in spades, you know. So don't what's the word? Don't sell us so short with a lack of experience, because it's going to come so quickly. And what you said is so true. There's so many more important things than no one likes the person who's been doing it a long time. They're stuck in their ways. A lot of those guys as well, Chris, they don't know what they don't know. Just because you've been doing real estate a long time doesn't mean you're good. I know people that are pretty useless and they have all these blind spots, but for whatever reason, they've had a lot of business in the past. And you know, in a few months, you'll be running circles around them just because you have that athlete mentality. And people that don't come from a sports background, they just don't really. You can apply that to anything. It's like your superpower. Whereas a lot of people I know, they've been in the business 5, 6, 7 years. They kind of got a few lucky breaks early. They never really took the time to learn, and they haven't really evolved much at all in 6, 7 years. So you're going to find you can do so well with this. I would say the only thing is almost don't set your sights too low. I really think that, Chris. That's one thing I've really been thinking about. It's the start of the year, thinking about goal setting. And I always used to set my goals, I think, a bit too low. And that's something this year I'm really trying to focus on, is just having big dreams. And even if you don't hit them, you're going to probably go a lot further than if you just have these small goals. So I would say it must be hard for you, because you're used to excelling in combat sports for decades. You know, you've been fighting in the top shows. You're used to being, you know, you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, you're a black belt in fighting, right? In combat. And then suddenly now you're putting on this white belt. You're a new, you know, you're working commercial real estate. It's new, but don't think that you're like a normal white belt, because so many of the lessons are going to transfer. When you've been to the top of one mountaintop, it's so easy to transfer that to the next one.
I 100% agree with you, because being an athlete, it's that competitiveness, right? I might not be the best, but I also like don't check out. So once we get off here, like I have a bunch of studying things I saved earlier on, like things I'm going to read up on you know, commercial zoning, all that, like, because I want to know it. But like the other people aren't doing that. That's the thing, is like I'll close the gap real quick because I'm competitive. I don't like being mediocre in anything. And I'll relate it to something you said about, like, if you take real estate or any business or whatever, and then the gym. So the mixed martial arts or training gym, whatever gym it is, that's my like home and what I'm used to. So the biggest red flags for me when we're talking about like how you walk in, how you present yourself, is if you walk into my gym and you're like, I've had 500 street fights, blah, blah, blah. I just need to learn how to wrestle. I know I'll be UFC champion. You know who's getting fucked up that day? You are. Because we are all going to beat the shit out of you. But if you walk in, you're a humble guy. I don't care if you have been in 500 fights. If you're just like, hey, you know, like I really want to learn what you guys do here is cool and everything. You know who's not going to get beat up that day? You. Because you walked in, you checked your ego, and then you came to learn, which is what I do. That's why I don't like walk in there acting like, hey, you know, I used to be in the UFC, this and that. Like, you don't know who I am, blah, blah, blah. And like start bossing around, because if you walk in humble and ready to learn, there's a million people that are ready to teach you. But if you walk in knowing like you know everything, everybody is going to fire down on you and to test you. And that's kind of the same thing I've taken into the business world, because I've had a ton of other business jobs. You know, I've worked for some of the biggest corporations in the world. And just I've learned along the way, like the more honest you are with people, you'd be surprised how many people will like take you under their wing and like teach you everything. And if you're just a sponge and like listen and just be very humble and like take in what they have to say, whether you agree with it or not, you might as well hear it out. Mm-hmm. And that goes a long way in life. So if you're listening to this, no matter what your job is or anything, just know you can learn something from everybody. I've had white belts teach me things at the gym, and I'm a black belt. Like I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years almost. And I'll have a white belt ask me a question and then show me something. I'm like, hold on, do that again. Like, I'm paying attention. You never know what you learn.
I love that. That idea of humility it's so important, because you can learn so much from so many different people. And to be honest, Chris, like not having, had a few messages back and forth, but I'm really impressed by your humility, given all the success you've had in different areas of your life. So that's definitely going to be a reason why you're going to kill it in this next path, just by having that mindset. Because that's one thing I've just noticed is so many people get a bit of success, and then I see this a lot in real estate, and then the ego goes to their head, and just keeping that same mindset is it's again another superpower. So yeah, I'm really excited for you, man. It's gonna be really cool. And just so you know, I don't know the Denver market, but if there's anything, if you ever want to bounce ideas off me or anything, I'm always here, man. Because that's I'm just a big fan. I got to ask you, our mutual friend again, John. He said, ask Chris what it's like to have a more famous girlfriend than he is, because I know Whitney's million followers on Instagram. She's big time in the fitness world. What's that like, dating someone like that?
No, I hate it. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, again, it goes to like humility, right? Like I'm not in competition with her. We're on a team, right? I mean, I love her to death. Like if I can help her or introduce her to people or anything, I always do. And she does the same. I feel like that's what makes our relationship so great, is it's like we're not in competition with each other ever. Neither one of us ever gets jealous about like opportunities or anything. We try to like feed it, because like if she wins, I win. Mm-hmm. What's hers is mine. What's mine is mine. No, it's just
no, but Chris, that's so true. I think so many people are almost in competition with their significant others. And I've always said the same thing. Like for me, my wife's my teammate, and we divide and conquer. And there's so many times where she's like, I want to take care of this. I'm like, go for it, baby. Like I'll focus on what I'm good at. You focus on what you're good at. And the sum of you is going to be more than the individual parts. And it takes as a man, it takes a lot of self-confidence to be in a situation where, you have an attractive woman like that with this huge following, and you're just her biggest fan. And like you said, her success is your success because you're together. So the kudos to you, man. Honestly, I see, don't you see that a lot, Chris, in relationships where it's almost like if a guy is with a very successful woman, it's almost like there's some kind of competition there, as opposed to being, it's like, you should be proud of it, because she's with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've fought the toughest guys in the world. Like I don't feel emasculated one bit by her success. Like if she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, I would be cheering her along. I mean, I might be driving a different car and everything, cheering her along, but no, I mean, I am like more than happy to help her in any way. And she's helped me a ton, it's, more people need to realize, like, I think the world has come to so self-focused, but like, we're like tribes, mm-hmm. The team, if you recognize like a team aspect and like everybody could win together, you can go way further. Everybody else thinks that like Lawrence, if you're successful, that takes from my success. Like that does what you have making you successful doesn't take away from me. There's enough to go around. And Whitney and I have always been on like the same wavelength since we've gotten together, just like win, 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 like help each other do that. Like if she has a bad day, I try to make her day better. If I have a bad day, she does everything possible, like make me dinner, whatever, to like make my day better. And I think that team aspect goes a long way, because when you have a partner, like you don't feel alone. So doing things together is like a huge advantage. I've always said, like, I think one of the biggest curses in the world would be being rich by myself. If you're rich by yourself, then you have to pay for all your friends to do the shit that you want to do because you don't want to do it alone. But if all your friends are growing and successful at the same time, like that's a fun time, because then we could go to Greece, we can go to Italy, we could do whatever we want, and everybody can go, and I don't have to be like, fine, I'll buy your flight and hotel, your flight and your hotel, because I want to do it. It's not fun to be successful by yourself. So the more that you can bring your friends up with you, the better time you're going to have anyway.
You just reminded me of one of my favorite sayings: a rising tide lifts all boats. And what you said is so true. I remember when I was really wealthy in my early 20s from trading, and I would always just be, paying for my buddies to go on trips and everything because they weren't where I was financially. And now I'm the annoying friend where I tell my friends things they might not want to hear because I want them to get their head out of their ass, because I want them to fulfill their potential so that they can be successful, because I don't want to be the most successful among my friends. I want us all to be successful together. So I know sometimes I'm an annoying friend because I'll tell my friends things that I don't want to tell them, things they don't want to hear unless it's for their own growth. And it's exactly like what you said. I want everyone around me to be successful, and I also want myself to be successful. I don't want to be the only one. So we're kindred spirits in that way, for sure.
Yeah, like celebrate together, it doesn't take away from anybody.
Exactly. And like you said, it's not, if you have that abundance mindset, I think we're in the world is so open now with technology, and we're in the most capitalist country in the world with the most opportunities. So just someone else, if you're not where you want to be in life, you should be looking at the people who are much more successful than you and seeing what you can learn from them, seeing if they're meant to you. And most successful people, if you reach out and you say, hey, I want to get to where you're at, can you mentor me? You'll be surprised at how amenable people are to that. So anyone that's listening, I'm sure, like if you're an aspiring young fighter and they wanted to pick your brains, you'll be happy to help them because you'll see a lot of your younger self in them. So I think just asking for help and seeing people more successful than you as an inspiration as opposed to competition, I think is such a great mindset.
100%. I couldn't say it any better.
Brother, I know you got zoning to study. I would love to do this again in a bit of time and see how real estate's going. But Chris, you're the man, brother. I'm so happy to get to chat to you. And it's cool when you've been watching someone for many years, you've been a fan from the outside, and you get to talk to them and just be, I'm inspired by your humility. You're such a badass, and you've got the one of a million people's dreams, and you're just a humble, cool guy. So kudos to you, man. All your success hasn't gone to your head, and you've got that amazing humility considering all the success you have. So I'm a big fan, and honestly, I mean, anything, I don't know how much I can help, but anything with real estate, I'm always here. And my dream would be us to do a deal together, some kind of cross-state deal with investors or a building or something, because you'll be surprised, Chris, that the real estate world is a lot smaller than you think, and you cross paths with a lot of the same people. So if I ever have anyone looking in Denver, I'm gonna shoot them your way.
Oh, same to you, man. Thank you so much. I know off this, we're gonna keep in touch anyway. I enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite podcasts ever, actually. So thank you so much.